Keanu Reeves finished reading the letter, lifted his head, and without saying a single word, walked off the stage. 200 people in the studio watched in complete silence. The cameras kept rolling. Jimmy Fallon sat frozen at his desk, his mouth slightly open, unable to form words. The Roots, who had been playing softly in the background, stopped mid-note. The audience, trained to react with laughter and applause, did neither. They just stared. Because what had just happened on The Tonight Show wasn't part of the script. It wasn't planned. And it certainly wasn't something anyone would forget. But to understand why Keanu walked off that stage, why Jimmy couldn't speak, and why that letter changed everything, we need to go back. Back to 3 weeks before this taping. Back to a small hospital room in Portland, Oregon, where a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell was writing the most important letter of her short life. Sarah had been a fan of The Tonight Show since she was 8 years old. Not because she understood all the jokes or knew who every celebrity guest was, but because watching Jimmy Fallon made her forget, even for just 30 minutes, that she was sick. Stage 4 leukemia doesn't give you many reasons to smile. But Jimmy did. Every single night. Her parents had reached out to the show months earlier, hoping for a video message, maybe a signed photo, something to lift Sarah's spirits during her final round of treatments. The producers received hundreds of similar requests every week. They couldn't respond to all of them. But Sarah's letter was different. She didn't ask for anything for herself. Instead, she wrote about Keanu Reeves. "Dear Mr. Fallon," the letter began. "I know you probably get a million letters, and I know you can't read all of them. But if you could give this to Keanu Reeves if he's ever on your show, I would be so grateful. He doesn't know me, but his movies helped me understand that even when life is really, really hard, you can still choose to be kind. You can still choose to keep going. I want him to know that he made a difference. Even if he never knows my name." The letter never made it to Keanu. At least, not through official channels. Sarah passed away 2 weeks after she mailed it. Her mother, Rebecca, found the draft in Sarah's journal and posted it online, not expecting anything to come of it, just wanting to honor her daughter's last wish. The post went viral. And 3 days later, Keanu's team reached out directly to Rebecca. What happened next, nobody could have predicted. Not the producers, not Jimmy, and certainly not the audience who bought tickets thinking they were just going to watch a fun late-night show. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Keanu didn't want publicity for what he was planning. He didn't want cameras documenting his visit to Rebecca's home in Portland. He simply showed up, unannounced, and spent 4 hours with Sarah's family, listening to stories about her life, looking at photos, and learning about the girl who had written him that letter. Before he left, he asked Rebecca for one thing, a copy of the original letter, the one Sarah had drafted in her journal before mailing the typed version. "I'd like to read it," he told her. "On television. If that's okay with you." Rebecca didn't understand at first. "Read it where? Why?" But Keanu explained. "Sarah wanted me to know her words. But I think the world should know them too. I think people need to hear what a 12-year-old girl facing death understood about life better than most of us ever will." 2 weeks later, Keanu was booked as a guest on The Tonight Show. The producers knew he wanted to do something special, something outside the normal interview format, but they didn't know what. Jimmy was told only that Keanu had a personal story to share, and that it might get emotional. "No problem," Jimmy said. He'd handled emotional moments before. He was a professional. He could manage it. But nobody was prepared for what actually happened. The show started normally. Jimmy did his monologue, landed his jokes, the audience laughed on cue. Then he introduced Keanu, who walked out to massive applause wearing his usual all-black ensemble, humble smile in place, waving to the crowd. They did the typical banter, talked about his latest projects, shared a funny story about filming. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then, about 8 minutes into the interview, Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The camera caught it, a close-up of weathered notebook paper, edges slightly torn, handwriting in blue ink visible through the fold. Jimmy glanced at his cue cards, confused. This wasn't on the rundown. "Jimmy," Keanu said quietly, his voice cutting through the studio noise. "I need to do something, if that's okay. I need to read something." Jimmy nodded, uncertain but trusting. "Of course, man. Whatever you need." Keanu unfolded the paper slowly, carefully, like it was made of glass. The studio, sensing something different, went quiet. You could hear the cameras adjusting focus. You could hear someone in the audience shift in their seat. Keanu looked down at the letter, took a breath, and began. "Dear Mr. Fallon," he read, his voice steady but soft. "I know you probably get a million letters, and I know you can't read all of them." Jimmy's expression changed. He sat up straighter. He didn't know what this was yet, but he knew it wasn't a bit. This was real. Keanu continued. "But if you could give this to Keanu Reeves if he's ever on your show, I would be so grateful. He doesn't know me, but his movies helped me understand that even when life is really, really hard, you can still choose to be kind." The camera cut to Jimmy. His eyes were glistening. He pressed his lips together, trying to hold composure. "You can still choose to keep going," Keanu read, his voice cracking slightly now. "I want him to know that he made a difference. Even if he never knows my name. My name is Sarah. I'm 12 years old. And by the time anyone reads this, I'll probably be gone. But I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for showing me that heroes aren't just in movies. They're real. And sometimes they're the people who remind us to be kind when the world feels really dark." Behind the scenes, something unprecedented was happening. The director in the control room didn't cut to commercial. The producers didn't signal to wrap. Everyone just let the moment breathe. Keanu folded the letter carefully and looked up, directly at the camera. Not at Jimmy. At the camera. At the millions of people watching at home. "Sarah Mitchell wrote this letter 3 weeks before she passed away from leukemia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She never got to mail it to me directly. Her mother found it after she died. And when I read it, I realized something." He paused. The silence in the studio was deafening. We spend so much time trying to make an impact, trying to be remembered, trying to matter. And here's this kid, who had every reason to be angry at the world, to give up, to stop caring. But instead, she used her last bit of energy to write a letter thanking a stranger for reminding her to be kind. Keanu's voice broke. Fully broke. He stopped, looked down, composed himself. When he looked back up, tears were running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. "I didn't know Sarah," he continued. "I never got to meet her. But she knew me. Or at least, she knew the version of me that I try to be. And I think that's the point. We don't always know who we're affecting. We don't always see the impact we have. But it's there. It's always there." Jimmy Fallon, who had interviewed hundreds of celebrities, who prided himself on keeping shows light and fun, who always knew what to say, sat at his desk with tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. He tried. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He just shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. Keanu looked at him, then back at the camera, then down at the letter in his hands. And then he did something no guest had ever done in the history of The Tonight Show. He stood up, still holding the letter, and without a word, walked off the stage. Not to the wings where guests normally exit. He walked down the stairs, into the audience, toward the back of the studio, and disappeared through the rear doors. The cameras didn't follow him. They stayed on Jimmy, who sat there, stunned, his hands covering his face. The Roots didn't play. The audience didn't move. For 17 seconds, which felt like 17 minutes, there was absolute silence on a show designed to never stop moving, never stop talking, never stop entertaining. Finally, Jimmy wiped his eyes, looked directly into the camera, and said the only thing he could manage. "We're going to take a break. We'll be right back." But what happened during that commercial break is the part of the story that never aired. The part that changed Jimmy Fallon forever. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The producers rushed to Jimmy's desk during the break, asking if he was okay, if he wanted to end the show early, if he needed a moment. But Jimmy wasn't listening. He was looking at the back doors of the studio, where Keanu had disappeared. "Where did he go?" Jimmy asked. Nobody knew. Keanu's team was just as confused as everyone else. Then Jimmy did something he'd never done before. He stood up, took off his tie, dropped it on his desk, and walked off his own set, leaving his producers stammering behind him. He went through the same doors Keanu had used, into the back hallway of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where staff offices and dressing rooms lined the corridors. He found Keanu sitting on the floor outside his dressing room, back against the wall, knees pulled up, still holding Sarah's letter. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just sitting there, staring at nothing. Jimmy sat down next to him. Didn't say anything at first. Just sat there, on the floor of a hallway in the building where he'd hosted one of the biggest shows in television for over a decade, in his suit pants and dress shirt, tie abandoned, sitting next to one of the most famous actors in the world. "I couldn't stay up there," Keanu said finally. "I couldn't perform anymore. That letter. That kid. She's gone, Jimmy. And I'm here reading her words on TV like it's content, like it's a moment. It felt wrong. It felt like I was using her." Jimmy shook his head. "You weren't using her, man. You were honoring her. That's different." "Is it?" Keanu looked at him. "She wanted me to know her words. She didn't want the world to know them. I made that choice for her. For her mother. I don't know if that was right." Jimmy thought about that. He thought about all the emotional segments he'd done over the years. The surprise reunions, the viral feel-good moments, the tears and laughter that made great television. He'd always believed those moments mattered. But sitting there on that hallway floor, he wasn't sure anymore. "You know what I think?" Jimmy said. "I think Sarah knew exactly what she was doing. She wrote that letter to you, yeah? But she wrote it knowing she'd be gone. She wrote it hoping someone would read it. Maybe not on TV. Maybe not in front of millions of people. But she wrote it hoping her words would matter. And they do, Keanu. They really do." Keanu was quiet for a long moment. Then he handed the letter to Jimmy. "You should keep this," he said. Jimmy looked down at the worn notebook paper, at Sarah's handwriting, neat and careful despite everything she'd been going through. "I can't take this," he said. "This belongs to her family." "I already talked to Rebecca," Keanu said. "She wants you to have it. She said Sarah would have loved that. She said Sarah watched your show every night. You were part of her routine. Part of what made her feel normal. Rebecca thinks Sarah would want you to remember her. To remember why you do what you do." Jimmy stared at the letter, reading the words again. "You can still choose to be kind. You can still choose to keep going." He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. They sat there for another few minutes, not talking, just existing in the same space. Eventually, a producer peeked around the corner, hesitant to interrupt but needing to know what was happening. "Jimmy," she said softly, "we need to know if you're coming back. We can end the show here if you need to." Jimmy looked at Keanu. Keanu nodded. They both stood up, brushed off their pants, and walked back toward the studio together. When they returned to the stage, the audience had been sitting in silence for nearly 12 minutes. Some people had left, unsure if the show was continuing. But most stayed. They stayed because they sensed they were part of something real. Jimmy took his seat at the desk. Keanu sat back down in the guest chair. The cameras came back on. Jimmy looked directly into the lens and said, "I'm sorry for the break. That was longer than we planned. But some things can't be planned. Some things just need to happen." He pulled Sarah's letter from his pocket and held it up for the camera to see. This letter was written by a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell. She passed away 3 weeks ago. She loved this show. She loved Keanu. And she wanted the world to know that kindness matters. That choosing to keep going matters. That even when everything feels impossible, we can still choose how we treat each other. Jimmy's voice was steady now. Sarah, if you're watching from wherever you are, we heard you. And we won't forget. Keanu reached over and placed his hand on Jimmy's shoulder. No words. Just presence. The audience rose to their feet, not in applause but in reverence. The Roots didn't play them out. The cameras just held on two men sitting together in silence, holding space for a girl who taught the world what it means to choose kindness. That night, Jimmy kept Sarah's letter in his desk drawer. He still has it. Every show, before he walks on stage, he touches that drawer. Reminds himself why he's there. Not for ratings. Not for viral moments. But for the Sarahs of the world, watching from hospital rooms, hoping for 30 minutes of light in the darkness. Keanu never spoke publicly about that night again. He didn't need to. Sarah's words had done the speaking. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let someone else's truth fill the room. This is why we tell stories. This is why moments like these matter. Subscribe and share this, because Sarah's message deserves to live on. Choose kindness. Choose to keep going. Always.